When we learn about the American Revolution, the story usually starts the same way. 13 underdog colonies pinned against the Atlantic coast, finally rising up against the tyranny of the British Crown over taxes and tea. We are taught that the rallying cry of taxation without representation drove the entire conflict. But look past the colonial cities and the harbor protests, and you find a completely different pressure point. Just beyond the established settlements lay a vast, uncharted western wilderness. The economic hopes of the colonies relied on the ability to claim and settle these new territories. By keeping the historical lens focused tightly on eastern seaboard tax disputes, the popular narrative obscures the imperial ambitions at play in the early American project. When the land encompassed by the colonies was defined, most of the original charters omitted western boundaries. This allowed for a legal interpretation that a colony could expand westward indefinitely. The British government, however, had a different agenda. To avoid expensive border wars and maintain control over the interior, they needed to halt this expansion and respect existing Native American territories. To enforce this, the Crown issued the Proclamation of 1763. This decree established a physical boundary across the crest of the Appalachian Mountains. The king drew a legal line along these peaks, separating white colonists from the native territory to the west. Colonists were ordered to remain east of this line, effectively trapping their economic growth against the Atlantic seaboard. This geographical decree fractured the relationship between king and colonist, turning British rule into a direct obstacle to colonial wealth. Settlers immediately breached the Proclamation Line, pushing into native land to harness natural resources. While often associated with rogue pioneers, this movement was driven by the highest levels of colonial society. George Washington, alongside his role as a military leader, was a significant speculator in Western land real estate. The financial portfolios of the Founding Fathers made the British boundary intolerable, creating a direct economic necessity for rebellion. The revolutionary demand for freedom was inextricably linked to the freedom to extract profit from indigenous lands without British oversight. Across the boundary, Native American nations observed this relentless colonial encroachment. Indigenous leaders realized that an independent United States would pose an unrestrained existential threat compared to the distant British Crown. This led to a calculated geopolitical strategy, with Native American tribes forming active military alliances with the British. Throughout the long 8-year war, indigenous forces fought alongside the Crown to prevent the United States from forming. The inclusion of these alliances reveals the Revolution as a multi-factional war for control of the North American continent. By 1783, the British military faced defeat, leading to formal peace negotiations. The resulting treaty formally established the 13 United States as an independent sovereign nation. In a final geopolitical concession, the defeated British ceded the vast native lands west of the Appalachians directly to the new United States. This agreement effectively signed away millions of acres of indigenous territory that Britain had no practical or moral right to give. The newly formed states immediately laid legal claim to these western domains, carving the continent into aggressive land claims. On the ground, however, these territories remained entirely occupied by sovereign Indian nations. The structure of the nascent U.S. government was engineered to absorb these territories, converting them into co-equal states. The 1783 treaty launched a multi-generational offensive into the western interior. American independence created a legacy of systemic displacement, feeding a continental empire through the sale and settlement of indigenous soil.